Hi, everybody. I just wanted to make a quick reflection video today on your budget worksheet assignments. So I've gotten everybody submitted and I've looked through them. You should have a grade for yours by now. I wanted to make some overall comments about comparing our own finances to that of what it might be like to be an older adult who's either maybe at risk for being in poverty or low income tweener, and older adults who are at that 100% to 125% the federal poverty line. We look at those that are considered very poor. So one of the things that I want you to think about as you look at your own budget is what kinds of things are we missing that are expenditures that you might have if you were living completely independently or paying for absolutely all of your expenses on your own. Some of you are, and that's accurately reflected in your budget. But there are a few things that we didn't add in there, right, that are pretty typical of a college student, like tuition, which is very expensive, and certainly a lot of us have loans for those costs, but those will have to be paid, and that's not unlike having debt, right? Or if you have ongoing credit card debt, which is also not in the budget. But I was reading through some recent stats yesterday on economics and older adulthood, and it was interesting to me that a third of families that have a 65-plus-year-old as the head of the household have an average of over $40,000 in debt still. So that's something to think about when you're thinking about your monthly budget and comparing it. And if you're thinking of a third of households, it's usually those households that have less money or assets that have quite a bit of debt. Now, a lot of that could be medical expenses, medical emergencies, like I talked about in the poverty lecture. People who are really at risk for poverty are those people who are living paycheck to paycheck and one medical emergency away from poverty and then being in poverty for the rest of their existence. So $40,000 on average for a third of family households with older adults as the head. That's quite a bit of debt. Could be second mortgages from paying off student loans for children, could be healthcare emergencies, a number of different things where you had to take out potentially a second mortgage or other things where you still have quite a bit of debt to pay off every month, an added expense. Another thing I want us to think about as we think about our own budgets is how do we spend versus how might an older adult spend? So this was some statistics from a consumer expenditure survey, and these are all older adult households, with 65-plussers. And this is broken down by poverty level, right? So that less than 125% bar is those currently considered in poverty. The next bar up, 125 to 199, would be those at risk. The next bar up is a little more stable, and then the last bar is certainly economically stable. So where do their expenditures go? Quite a bit of it goes to housing. So on average, about a third of an older person's budget is still going to housing. And you can think about your own budgets. And this is where we want to contrast again, right? So most of us are in living situations right now where we may not be paying the full amount of rent. And if we were paying the full amount of rent, or if we lived in a region that had high housing cost prices, we certainly see that would be quite a bit higher of a monthly budget. And for older adults who aren't in that at risk for being poor or very poor, you're only making, about $1,000 a month with Social Security, and you add on top of that food costs, which are about, $3,700 a year for most households that are low income, spend about $3,700 a year, or roughly 33% of your budget as a low income person goes toward food. And that's statistics from the USDA. As opposed to those of us with more stable incomes, including myself, we only spend about 12.5% of our total monthly income on food. which is reflected, in your own budgets as well. But like I said, in college, we're usually in a lot of sharing situations where we have roommates. We might be getting food from our parents, or when they come into town, they might be going grocery shopping for us or something like that. But for an older adult, right, this is the full responsibility. And as we saw in the video from the Kaiser Family Foundation, $16 a month in food stamps isn't a lot to go on, plus your Social Security check, which 70% of that for older adults and low income level is going towards housing. So if you're low income, 70% of your check may be going towards housing, renting. Another big expenditure for older adults that we don't incur oftentimes in the typical age group of a college student is healthcare costs. So several of you have either $0 or $25 or something like that, because you may be paying minimal copays and a couple visits a year max. But for older adults, a lot of their costs are out-of-pocket medical costs. So things like medications that aren't covered by Medicare or aren't covered by Medigap insurance or aren't covered by Medicaid, they're still paying money, a decent amount, for out-of-pocket for medications, and that's a big cost. And one of the major reasons that we see older adults sinking down into those low levels of very poor is out-of-pocket medical costs. So what I thought might be interesting for you guys to see is what it's like to spend like an older adult in Riley County. So not all of you are members of Riley County, right? Because that you could be from a lot of different places and taking this course or going back to where you lived before. But if you're thinking about comparing it to the Manhattan experience, what's it like to spend like an older adult? So the National Coalition on Aging has sponsored sort of a think tank of what is an elder, a fair elder index. What are the basic, how much does it cost to cover your basic needs as an older adult in all kinds of areas in the U.S.? And with UMass Boston Institute for Women's Policy Research partnership, they created this elder index. Really cool website. The link is on this slide here, and you can either Google it, or I can also make this available, and we'll post these extra slides for you guys. But what you can do is go onto the website and search by state, and then further break it down by county. You can compare states to each other. You can compare it to the national averages. You compare state averages to each other on how much it really costs to live as an older adult. And that includes, you can look at single elders, couples, you can compare them to each other, as I did in this chart here. And it breaks down what the sort of, like your monthly budget that you made, what the costs for an older adult are to meet your basic needs in your area. So adapted to the cost of living in that area. So this is what it's like in Riley County. And just a reminder here that if you're a single older adult, the federal poverty level is $11,770, and the 125% level, which is still at risk or considered very poor, is $14,700. So this is how much money you're making or below if you're impoverished as an older adult. In Riley County, it might take you anywhere from $20,700 to $30,000 if you still have a mortgage as an older adult, which we know that lots of older adults continue to pay mortgages with 30-year plus loans, having to have a second mortgage on your home to pay off things, etc. Or a renter, so it costs you at least twice, if not close to 3 times the federal poverty level to meet your basic needs in Riley County. Again, underscoring the importance of all of those programs that we have that subsidize and are needs-based and age-based, like Meals on Wheels and Feed America, and programs like Medicaid, right, that really are for lower income individuals, including older adults, to be able to get healthcare and cover those costs that otherwise they wouldn't be able to afford. And this is just so that you can see the comparison of what it costs to live like an older adult in the U.S. in general. A little bit higher in some of these categories than Riley County, but we're actually fairly comparative to the average US. But there's lots of ups and downs, right? So if you went into the website and you looked at what it was like to be, live like an older adult in San Diego County, California, where I lived, it would be much higher, right? Because the cost of living there is much higher, rent is much higher, So I was teasing the on-campus class, letting them know that, some people either paid zero for rent because they still lived at home, or they paid $200 or $300 in a rent share. I was telling them that I lived in Boston one year after college, and I paid $1,400, and I had a roommate. So we were both paying quite a lot. And I've never lived anywhere that I paid that cheap of rent. And even in Lawrence, when I went to KU for grad school, I think I paid $900 plus for my one bedroom with my washer and dryer. But, so costs of housing is a huge cost. In particular for older adults, we see, again, older adults with lower income, 70% of their income going towards that. So these have real world implications, right? And this is from your lecture about, helping these programs continue at a level where we can. All right. That's just a sense of comparing your own expenditures and what it's like to live as a college student to what it might be like to live as an older adult, where their money goes, where your money might start going when you become older, right? If we're taking a lifespan perspective here, and how those things shift over time. And the importance of things like Social Security to be able to meet the needs of older adults. And just remember the stat: if we didn't have Social Security as we know it, instead of having, conservative estimate 10%, more likely estimate with a supplemental poverty measure, more like 15%, we would have 40% of older adults impoverished. So it makes it pretty important to go to the polls and to talk and be an advocate for programs. So